Welcome to the Detroit Lions Morning Rounds podcast. I'm Jimmy Liao, MD, University of Michigan Medical School graduate, board certified in family medicine. Let's talk about the Saints Michael Burton testing positive for COVID. His Saturday morning PCR test returned Saturday evening positive. He was actually on the plane or off the plane by the time the results returned. What is the NFL going to do right now? They're going to cross their figurative fingers in an attempt to see if this test can fall under the false positive label. This requires a rerun of the original sample and a new POC test, which is the point of care rapid test, to both be negative. The POC test returns in 15 minutes. However, the rerun of the PCR test may take hours. The initial run seems like it takes about 12 hours. Unsure how long a rerun of the test will take. So we may not know the false positive designation until early Sunday morning. Now, if it doesn't fit the false positive label, the NFL should act as if it is a true positive. If it does fit the false positive label, should the NFL even be calling it a false positive? Well, that's debatable. The POC test is not thought to be as accurate as the PCR test, which means the false negative rate is potentially very high. The rerun of the PCR test, the original sample, it's unknown whether that's going to be as accurate as the first run. Hopefully, the NFL lab, the bioreference lab, has done some studies into their own lab to see if a rerun of the test is as accurate as the first run. Now, 7 players of the Saints who either sitting close on the plane to Michael Burton or identified to be close contacts via the contact tracing bracelets are being retested, presumably with the POC tests currently. Now, are these players going to be allowed to play in the game, assuming the game's even going to happen in the next 1 to 2 days, based on them being close contacts, which is the definition is 6 feet for 15 minutes. Being a close contact increases your risk of contracting COVID. So if the NFL wanted to play things very safe, they would quarantine these 7 players for a week to 10 days to make sure they don't convert to be COVID positive in that time. Let's talk a little bit about POC tests versus PCR tests. The POC test is the point of care test. It's faster. It returns in just a few minutes, but is considered to be less accurate, meaning a higher false negative rate than the PCR test. The PCR test is the polymerase chain reaction test. It takes up to a day to return. With the NFL, it seems like it returns in about 12 hours or less. Currently, the NFL tests daily with the PCR test. However, given what's been going on this whole week, including what happened with Michael Burton, I suspect they're going to start also testing with the POC test in the hopes of catching a positive player before they get on the practice field, or in Michael Burton's case, before he gets on the plane and potentially exposes other people. Currently, the NFL does not test on game day to prevent any game day chaos with tests returning during game. However, I suspect they may start doing POC tests on game day. They would have those results back well before the game starts, and that would hopefully catch a positive player before he plays in a game. What does this mean to the rest of the NFL season, what's happened this week? Well, the NFL set a potentially season-killing precedent by postponing the Titans game multiple weeks. They spaced the Titans game 2 weeks between the last game and the next game. And they also postponed the Patriots game 1 to 2 days at least because of a single positive test of Cam Newton. Now, the Titans currently have 16 positive tests. They started out with 8. So that was a higher count than the Patriots. So understandable that they would want to call off the week's game in the hopes of eliminating the outbreak, allowing players who contracted COVID to clear it out of their system, which they could easily do within 2 weeks, as well as to catch any positive tests, conversions over the next week or two before a game happens. Let's talk about the incubation period, which is the time of exposure of a person to COVID to the development of their symptoms. It's considered to be 2 to 14 days, although most likely people will convert within a week or so, but nobody really knows for sure. So the Titans game being delayed and giving them 2 weeks until the next game does cover the incubation period. However, it does not completely eliminate the risk of a positive Titans player playing in the next game, because you could develop symptoms in the 12 to 14 day mark. However, those symptoms could persist for many days after that. Now, what's going to happen with the Lions-Saints game? Well, based on what happened with the Patriots game, they postponed it a day or two because of a single positive test for Cam Newton. By that precedent, the Lions game will likely be postponed 1 to 2 days or even canceled for this week. I have a question about what the NFL is doing here by postponing games 1 or 2 days, because that's not enough time to tell if a player has contracted COVID or not. It's not enough time to determine if a player is going to convert from negative to positive with COVID. So I'm not sure what the reasoning is. It does give a little bit more time to determine if players will become positive, but certainly not enough time to cover the incubation period, which again is 2 to 14 days. Because the NFL is setting this precedent, it's potentially going to kill the season. They can't postpone games anytime there's a positive test. Otherwise, the season just can't happen. Now, I wonder what the NFL was thinking going into this season, because they had to have known there were going to be positive tests. There were going to be many outbreaks. And they had to know that they would have to accept some level of risk to the players and the staff. Well, if their plan going in was they were going to postpone games anytime even a single positive test occurred, then I don't see how they thought this was really going to work. Now, as far as the risk level of players in a game, we need to understand that risk falls along a spectrum. It's not all or nothing. This is because there's a false negative rate out there, which is real and it's potentially very high, 30% or even higher. Even if everybody in the stadium, all the players on the field tested negative, there's still a decent chance that there's a false negative or two out there. There could be 1 or 2 players with COVID, or even 10 players with COVID playing in that game that are testing false negative. So even if all the tests are negative for a game, it does not completely eliminate the risk. There's still a risk anytime they're playing football. So to postpone or cancel a game because there was 1 positive test during the week doesn't make a whole lot of sense to me if they're hoping to play this season, because they need to accept some level of risk. In other industries in society, they don't shut down the entire building or the whole company if a single person tests positive. So I don't know if the NFL should be doing that either. That's a philosophical question, but the NFL needs to really think about how they're going to react to positive tests going forward. Now, one proposal from many to try to get the season to go smoothly the rest of the season is a hotel quarantine, a bubble situation, sort of like what the NBA is doing. Now, I have some serious doubts about the feasibility of this. Asking players and staff to quarantine for 3 months, for playoff teams, we were talking 4 to 5 months. That's a lot to ask of players and staff. Now, I would wonder who is going to be in this quarantine. Are all staff required to be at the hotel, such as equipment managers, athletic trainers, doctors? If they're not, then those guys are coming and going, breaking quarantine. Also, if friends, family, and hotel staff can come and go, then it's not really a true quarantine either. So there is outside exposure coming into this bubble, into this hotel, exposing the players possibly to COVID. So it's not necessarily going to help anything to have a hotel quarantine. I think ideally the players stay at home and do a home quarantine. That seems safer, it seems more feasible, it seems more amenable and likely for players to accept that kind of thing. And also realize, again, false negatives are a real thing. So even with a hotel quarantine, you could still have false negative players playing a game who are actually COVID positive. All right, so those are my quick thoughts on the whole Michael Burton situation. Breaking news, we'll see how this plays out over the next few hours, see if this Lions Saints game is going to be postponed or canceled. It's going to be very interesting after what's happened this week with the Titans, the Patriots, and now the Saints to see how the rest of the season is going to play out. I think the NFL needs to make some hard decisions and needs to start accepting more risk if they want the season to play out smoothly. Thanks for listening. Find me at Jimmy Liao MD on Twitter. Please leave any comments, questions, ratings, reviews, or subscribe. Thanks.